Today we're talking about personality. So, what are all of the things that you think about when you think about yourself? What are all of the words that you would use to describe yourself? Our personality is essentially what makes us us. It's what makes you you. It's what makes you unique. They're patterns of thoughts and emotions and behaviors that remain pretty stable across our lifespan. So they're kind of these constants about us. And again, it's just these are things that make you you. That's what your personality is. So there are different perspectives, just like we started the year learning about these different perspectives or these different approaches in psychology. Each of these different approaches have different theories that focus on, like what determines the development of the personality. So we're going to start off today with the psychoanalytic, or now known as the psychodynamic theory, which you might remember from the beginning of the year is all about the unconscious. So when you think about the psychodynamic approach, Freud should be the first name that comes to mind. So Freud's theory of personality, initially called the psychoanalytic theory, and his method of treatment known as psychoanalysis, is all about the unconscious mind, right? Freud saw the unconscious as a source for all of our impulses and motives and all of the conflicts that emerge within our personality. Remember, the focus of psychoanalytic theory is very much like kind of what is wrong with us, right? On pathology, as opposed to the humanist that we'll talk about and review in another video. But Freud believed that we go on about our lives largely unaware of all of the motives that drive and influence our behavior. So Freud's iceberg model of the mind kind of illustrates this notion that much of what drives us resides below the surface of our consciousness or on an unconscious level. He believed that the unconscious was this storehouse for all of our impulses, especially our destructive impulses and drives and conflicts that the conscious just isn't aware of. And we'll introduce these terms, the id, the ego, and the superego in a minute. Freud said that the contents of our unconscious are just too anxiety-provoking, too threatening, too upsetting, and so the ego will push them below the surface. And Freud also believed that when traumatic events escape the unconscious, they present as different types of disorders. For example, depression, anxiety, phobias. Not that all of those disorders were understood in Freud's day the way that they are now. But Freud believed that it was the repression of the escape of these repressed traumatic events, the escape of them from the unconscious that leads to these types of psychopathologies that we experience. So according to Freud's theory of the personality, there are three components of the personality: the id, the superego, and the ego. And I love this picture right here. I like to think of the id and the superego as being the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder, respectively, right? And then here in the middle we have the ego, who we're going to learn is the conscious self, whose job it is to resolve the conflicts between the id and the superego. So the id, according to Freud, or the pleasure principle, is the unconscious part of our personality that has our most basic, primitive drives. It's present at birth. It's the pleasure, again, the pleasure principle. If it feels good, do it. It's what's pushing us for immediate gratification of all of the ways in which we seek pleasure. So if the id is the devil on one shoulder, the superego is the angel on the other, always trying to get us to do the right thing. It's our conscience, Freud said, where all of our values are, our moral attitudes. It's the moral ideal. It's where we house the notions of what we should and shouldn't do. So it's the superego that's in constant struggle with the id, trying to get us to do the right thing. Well, the id's trying to get us to do the wrong thing. And then again, you have the ego, or the reality principle, whose job it is to come in and to settle these disputes or these conflicts between the id and the superego in ways that aren't going to result in negative consequences. So it's the conscious self, it's the rational part of the personality. That's the role of the ego. And in our next video, we're going to talk about something called defense mechanisms, which are ways that the ego seeks to protect itself when caught in these conflicts between the id and the superego. Just as a little bit of practice, I want you to think about this scenario and work it out on your own, applying what we just learned. So finals are approaching for college students. Explain a hypothetical conflict between their id and their superego. How might the ego resolve the conflict?